Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. We'll get started in just a minute or two. We're waiting on a few more people to log in and get settled. Thank you. Hello, and thank you for joining us. On behalf of Wilco and Caresoft, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, a roadmap to DoD 814003 compliance, a step-by-step guide for agencies and contractors. At this time, I would like to introduce our speaker for today, Laura Adaletta, Market Director at Wilco. Laura, the floor is all yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks, Morgan, and thank you to Caresoft for hosting us on this very timely topic. And thank you to all of you on the call for joining us today. So hopefully we can guide you through some of the initial considerations of planning your transformation from the IA framework to the new DCWF policy. And hopefully we'll get as many of your questions answered after the presentation as possible. So let's get started. As Morgan already said, my name is Laura Adaletta, and I am the Market Director at Wilco. We are the largest provider of 8570 and 8140 cyber workforce management solutions within the DoD. We've got over 1 million users and organizations from the Army to the Fourth Estate, and also private defense industrial base enterprises as well. I work primarily within our product management practice to help align our product strategy to bridge what the policy itself demands with all of the ins and outs of how the cyber workforce actually understands and implements it. So in other words, you can think of me as a customer advocate with major nerd chops on Directive 814003. Today, we're going to talk about a couple of big picture things that you need to consider before you begin to implement a plan to achieve 8140 compliance, namely the timeline on which you'll be operating, a few key differences between the IA and DCWF frameworks, and some examples of other interrelated systems. We'll also dive into some of the details that you'll need to hammer out in order to meet these regs efficiently and effectively. For example, how will you access DoD position and personnel data? What activities might the cyber workforce be able to manage on their own, which will help reduce your workload? And what will you be expected to report out either to the system of record with the DoD or to your own leadership? So firstly, regulation timing. DoD 8140 isn't all that new. The first directive 8140-01 was actually signed all the way back in 2015. Then that was updated to 8140-02 in 2020. Not that any of us remember that year all too well, but up until February of last year, the policy was mostly a repackaging of 8570. However, once that 8140-03 manual was published, we really saw a massive shift in the way that the DoD was thinking about cyber work roles and the various ways in which the workforce could and should become qualified to perform their roles. So this was far beyond the handful of certificates that qualified people in cybersecurity and IT roles under the 8570 framework. It's important to note here that the policy currently impacts only civilians and military affiliated personnel until the report on draft proposed DFARS rule is out, and that should actually be next week. Contractors are not yet subject to the new regulations. That said, based on our conversations our agency customers and we are having, we do expect to start seeing contract modifications requiring compliance for contractors as early as the third or fourth quarter of this year. So when that language is added, contractors must be qualified at the commencement of work. Now, this is in contrast to civilians and military affiliated users who may be issued 6, 9, or 12-month waivers to complete their work role qualification requirements. Okay, so that was last year's news. As of this February, components were required to identify all positions designated as cyberspace workforce positions, assign a proficiency level, that's 1 to 3, so basic, intermediate, or advanced, share this coding data up to DMDC, and commit to annually reviewing and validating all encumbered personnel and billet information, so making sure that it matches among their chosen systems of record. This was a pretty big job in and of itself, and that's just the coding. So I think that this really helped to highlight the tremendous challenge ahead, because starting next year, civilian and military workforce must not only be coded to these work roles, they're also going to start to come up on actual qualification deadlines. These are going to come in at least 2 waves, and probably more, starting with those in cyberspace workforce element work roles. So we do have a CPD question for you here. If your position has been coded as an 8140 position, do you know your assigned DCWF work role? And you can just select your answer and submit in the poll window. All right, so wave one, there are 13 of these work roles. Again, each of them have 3 proficiency levels. The requirement set for each of these work roles is different. We'll get into that in a couple of moments here, but you can see an additional 5 workforce element roles are going to be required to meet compliance in 2026. So as I mentioned earlier, for civilian and military affiliated workforce, these foundational qualifications must be met within 9 months of this due date, and then residential qualification requirements are waived for an additional 3 months beyond that. And again, for contractors, that's on the commencement of work. So once that contract modification hits, you need to be fully compliant. And then there's these AI and data roles no one quite knows what to do with yet. There's no defined due date or even a qualification matrix for these yet. I know you're going to be dying for more information, but for now, these are still TBD. But more than when, you probably want to know what these regulations are going to require of you and your workforce. So let's look at some of the differences between 8570 and 8140. Particularly as it relates to the level of complexity of managing all this data. All right. Under the old IA framework, there were a total of 14 unique work roles made up of 4 different work roles with various proficiency levels or specialty areas. Personnel in each of these roles could be qualified through a handful of allowable certificates, and just like that, you're pretty much good to go. There were a few additional requirements for folks who had elevated access needs or other sort of agency-wide requirements, but relatively simple. Under 8140, there is a massive increase in complexity. So now there are 68 defined work roles, each having 3 proficiency levels for a total of 204 unique sets of requirements. These work roles are defined in matrices, and we're going to look at one in a minute, with qualifications broken down into 2 primary categories. There's foundational and residential. And users can meet their most core or foundational requirements in a few ways now. This does provide more flexibility for personnel, which is a good thing, but it takes a lot more mental gymnastics for administrators. So where previously they were required to hold one of several certificates, compliance can now be met using certificates, training, accredited higher education degree, or even an experience assessment. And users who aren't already assigned to an advanced role can use any of the higher level qualification options to become qualified. Finally, 8140 regs define and track more than 2,000 distinct knowledge, skills, abilities, and tools. Those are the KSATs you may often hear about. And these are different distinct job elements that the workforce must be proficient in to perform their work role duties. Everyone assigned a cyber work role must also maintain 20 hours minimum annual continuing education credits. Phew, so that's a massive increase in complexity here. All right, so let's look at an illustrative example. Here is an 8570 qualification matrix for someone coded to an IASAE 2 work role. As long as they had one of these 4 certificates and they renewed on schedule, they are considered compliant. In a similar DCWF security architect work role at level 2 proficiency, the same personnel can choose one of 4 certificates or a 4-year degree, or select a training from a separate spreadsheet, or they can request an experiential certification, an experiential qualification alternative. And this is something that is filled out in a workbook. It's board reviewed before it's approved. Once those foundational qualifications are met, they must meet on-the-job requirements. So these are common for everyone in the work role across the DoD, as well as a set of environment specific requirement, which is component defined, which means it's going to be different depending on who you report to, which group you're in, which work role you're assigned to. So once both the foundational and the residential requirements are met, personnel must meet those CPD hours, either what's required to maintain their certifications or 20 hours annually, whichever is greater. And speaking of those CPD credits, let's ask another quick question here. Do you know where to find the qualification matrices for your assigned DCWF work role? So if someone assigns you to a work role, where do you find those requirements right now. All right, so if you are in the hot seat to help develop your DoD component strategy for managing the new regulations, or you're a DIB leader looking ahead to new contract requirements, you should probably be wondering about how you're going to execute on this. So let's take a few minutes to talk about management tools, as well as some other systems you may need to link with in this 8140 compliance landscape. One of the first key decisions you will need to make before choosing a solution is, do you build or do you buy? Now, this is a topic of a whole separate webinar, really, but let's scratch the surface here. If we set aside the DoD's strategic preference for commercial off-the-shelf, or COTS, software procurement, broadly speaking, there are 5 critical points to consider when you make this decision. Number 1, how long will it take to have something usable? 2, what's the total cost of ownership over the life of the product, including engineering maintenance and customer support? 3, what are your must-have features and functionality? 4, what knowledge and expertise do you currently possess or have access to make something at least as good as what's already available? And then 5, what are your core competencies really? Is building software one of them, or is that a distraction? For 8140 compliance management, you will need at minimum the ability to manage work roles and proficiencies, keep qualification matrices updated along with the cyber workforce qualification program changes, that's often referred to as CWQP, maintain a record of a user's individual earned or assessed qualifications, and manage the variable residential requirements I mentioned a few slides ago. You are also very likely going to need to pull in information such as personnel and position data. And this can come from a number of other government systems, as well as, per the policy guidelines, you're also going to be required to integrate with and report out to the Advana system annually. Although the CIO's Workforce Innovation Directorate is going to allow this process to be manual during the transition, it will require integration down the road. So here's a few examples of some of the other systems we've seen in our experience as relevant to this compliancy work. Note, this is not an exhaustive list. Not everything here is going to apply to everyone, but just as an example, I mentioned before the manpower and personnel systems like FMTS and DCPDS. You may have cyber operations systems that you want to pull data from, like Centropy or IKE or Send2. You have the individual vendors who are providing certification, and then there may be some validation steps with those if you're not connected directly. So CompTIA, EC Council are 2 good examples. LMS systems, those learning management systems like FedVTE and Skillport. And then, as I just mentioned, Advana, so of reporting out to those risk and compliance reporting tools. And let's ask, I think this is our final CPD question here. Does your agency currently use a system to track and manage 8570? All right, so I would like to take a few minutes to show you Wilco's CyberStar system, and this was purpose-built for 8140 compliance. As a COT software, it comes turnkey with predictable upfront pricing, regular new feature development, as well as maintenance and support, US-based expert help desk, certification validation service for select vendors, live updates that meet the regulatory changes. All of this is baked in, and also FedRAMP in process. So a little bit easier on the procurement and security and risk management end there. I'm going to jump over to the system here and show you what we're looking at. All right, so usually I get started by taking the perspective of a user assigned to a cyber work role. In this case, I want to jump right to one of our core administrative functions, which is positions management. Within this set of features, you can import positions data from a source system like FMTS, or you can create a new position with this button here if need be. You can see that the position can be designated for privileged access or not, and you can specify the required affiliation, group or directorate to which it belongs, whatever work role or work roles that may be relevant to the position. But if I back out of that, let's see here, we're looking at the database of all encumbered and unencumbered positions currently in this, which is a demonstration system. So you may see some junky or nonsensical data, but this is just to demonstrate with. So I'm going to click on this security architect manager position, and you can see here that the status is filled because I have assigned this user, Charles F. Charleston, love his name, to this position. So if I jump over, let's find out a little bit about Charles F. Charleston. And I'm just going to search for him here, drop down his record. Note here, he's assigned to the DCWF, that work role, that position, the security architect 2 intermediate. And then if you'll peep this little clock icon here, I'm going to show you what that really means, what that really indicates by impersonating this user. This is something that supervisors and admins in Cyberstar can do to just get better perspective on what their users see, as well as their ability to take actions on their behalf. But ultimately, you know, this is Charles's personnel record within our system, and a lot of this may come from your personnel system of record via import. So let's look at his profile here. And so I just view the user's profile, and what I see here is Charles's overview page. Now, this is the landing page for general users, and the first thing that they will see when they log into the system. We authenticate using CAC or PIV authentication integrated with your organization's Active Directory or another user management system if it's not AD. But you can see Charles has been assigned to this 8140 work role. But as we all know, because we were paying attention here, this one is part of wave 1. So he's not actually required to be compliant until February 15th of next year. You can see that on the Dubai column here, as well as below in the compliance section, where his work role is labeled deferred, and he's not considered out of compliance until that date arrives. He does, however, need to complete his annual DoD-wide cyber awareness training, so he is out of compliance for the all personnel group. Let's get him compliant now because Charles is on it. And he actually completed his training yesterday afternoon. So let's see here. 30th, I'm going to make a little attachment. And save. And now that qualification enters pending verification in Charles's view. From the perspective of the compliance team, I just jump down to my management tools here, click on the compliance review, and you can see Charles's training certificate came through for my review. I'm going to look through all this data here, open up the certificate. Excuse me, my tabs are hidden at the top. And I can either verify or reject with a comment, but I'm going to go ahead and verify this because this looks good. And then if I go back to Charles's account to show you what he's seeing here, this is no longer on his to-do list, and he is now compliant for personnel. He can also view that certificate at any time in his qualification repository here. So what if we have actually just a real go-getter on our hands? Let me get rid of this here. Apologize. There's a Zoom toolbox over my windows here. There we go. And I'm gonna hide these meeting controls. All right, so here is Scott. So Scott's decided he wants to meet his requirements a little bit early. I'm gonna move to this screen just to show you this quick example here. So Scott's assigned to a security architect position, just like Charles. And when he drops down this task on his to-do list, he's presented with his various options for qualification. Now, if, say, Scott already has a bachelor's degree, he can just select yes here, enter in his information, and then that'll be validated by the compliance team. So you can see here, there's a little bit of context for what the policy actually demands of a degree used as a foundational qualification. And let's say he graduated actually 7 years ago. This is just going to take a shortcut here. He'll get a warning. You've entered a graduation date more than 5 years in the past, but he can still continue to enter that as long as he knows he's going to have to put in a resume along with the submission. And so he can just go ahead and submit that for the compliance team, and then you'd see it show up on the compliance review as I just demonstrated with Charles's. But I'm going to back up here. Let's say Scott doesn't have any of these options right now. So I'll note once again, this is not an option for contractor affiliated personnel who have to be compliant as soon as they're assigned to the work role. But since Scott is a civilian, he can say, no, I'm not actually qualified with any of these. And I'd like to maybe explore getting qualified through an experience certificate. But womp womp, I need 5 to 7 years validated experience for my assigned proficiency level, which I know I don't have. So perhaps I would like to request a voucher for certification instead. So how about the Certified Cloud Security Professional Certificate? I'll note my anticipated completion date here, and I'll smash that select certification button. And this lets the compliance team know my to-do item is in process, so I'm working towards compliance, but it doesn't actually remove it from my dashboard of important things I need to get done. So that will stay here until that qualification is met, at which point then he'll become compliant for the 8140 work role, whether that's, by the due date or ahead of schedule. All right. Meanwhile, on the other side of the fence, and I'll go back to this page here, your compliance team, admins, and other leaders can get insights into the compliance posture of the organization as a whole, or by the directorate level. And you'll see if I toggle my parameters here, my contractors still assigned to 8570 roles are doing pretty well at compliance. But when I drop down 8140, it's mostly just deferred work roles. So maybe I want to see how everyone's doing with meeting qualification requirements ahead of schedule. Or, I need to export any kind of set of information for whatever reporting purposes. I have 2 types of reporting in this system here. So we've got some pre-canned reports here that can export information in a format that's pretty common across all managers and organizations. We're going to ignore these mostly for now and take a look at the custom reporting tool. And here I can build as many variations with as many filters and columns as I might want. So I've already created an 8140 compliant ready user report here. I can download this to get all the latest information. So the configuration is set here, but once I hit the download button, it's refreshed with all my current data. And I can also add a report. So let's do that now. We're going to add a little sample custom report. You can create a description here. So created for Carahsoft webinar. And I can either keep this as a one-time custom report, I just need to run off a little bit of information, or I can maintain that and share it with others in the organization. And then here's where I would just add my filters. So let's say I want to look at everyone who has completed a date, completed something within the last, within the last week. I'm going to make that a little bit longer. And then here, there's a bunch of different filters you can add. I just click to accept that. And, if I want to remove any, I just, it's a pretty simple interface. And then my columns here, I can say, okay, great. For those who have completed something, show me, the actual certification number, the date that they completed it on, and the user's compliance status. And then there's a little results preview here, so I can kind of see what I'm getting as I'm building it instead of, at the end and realize I've got to make an adjustment. I'll save that. That shows up here in my list of custom reports, and then I can download that CSV file. I will say, this is more or less scratching the surface with Cyberstar. I do want to make sure we've got a little time for questions, and, actually got through this a little faster than I was anticipating. So if anyone would like me to show a particular part of the system or, dive into some of these questions, I'm more than happy to do that as well.
Yeah, hey Laura, we did get a question on whether the system can handle managing 8570 work roles at the same time as you're managing 8140 work roles.
Great question. So yes, you can. And I can show you this here in the system. So the work roles are configurable by the system admins, and we have here in the work roles, we part of the CyberStar system is configuring those work roles to the DCWF requirements and qualifications. So anything that's sort of policy based is baked into the system database, from the start. But you can also add custom framework work roles. So in this example, you've got 8570 here. You can see the framework type. This is just part of the configuration of the work role. But I could go back to Charles's account here and assign Charles, excuse me, assign Charles to an 8570 work role. And let's see, incident responder, and save that. And then when I go back and look at Charles's user profile here, he is not compliant for that 8570 role. He's still showing, that this is deferred for the 8140, but then he can follow this new requirement that popped up on his to-do list to become compliant for 8570. So it can absolutely handle 8570, 8140, as well as custom frameworks for your organization. So if you want to modify something from the policy, that's a possibility as well. Good question, though.
Hey Laura, you got time for another question?
I sure do.
All right, there was a question about residential requirements, and are they set at DoD level or are they set at the agency level, and what are they?
So if I'm understanding the question correctly, the question is, what are residential requirements? And I think that goes back to, where the Workforce Innovation Directorate is in the development of this policy. We've got a Fourth Estate agency, for instance, who is tracking all of their users to 8140 deferred work roles now, but they have not yet set their own, those component defined residential requirements yet. So we do have these collections. So once though the policy itself, is still developing. So you may have those on the job trainings. There's still some clarity chasing around how does this differ, from just sort of a KSAT assessment that some users may use for a foundational assessment. But I think even once those questions are answered, you're still going to have a set of component defined residential requirements. And really what that means is when you've decided, hey, I want everyone within this set of work roles to meet these additional training requirements, you can just go in and create a residential collection is the way that we, kind of maintain that information in the system. And you can drop those down and you can add any number of qualifications, trainings, assessments, or anything, or documentation that's in the system to that collection. And that would then show up on that to-do list for the user to complete for their work role. So you may, for instance, you can have all users within an entire workforce element, an entire framework, or even just within one work role. You may say, everyone here for a residential requirement is going to have to take these 6 trainings. But let's take the example of a really experienced cyber workforce personnel who says, this is kind of ridiculous. I don't feel like I need to take training. This is below my level. I've been doing this job for 10, 15 years. What gives? And so you may instead choose to assess that user's skills against the published KSATs for their work role to say, okay, I hear you. You say you don't want to waste your time in a training. We don't really want to pay for that with it if it's not necessary anyway. So rather than making you go through the training, we'll do an assessment and essentially ask you to pass a quiz. you could do a combination of that as well. So unfortunately, that's not a really clear answer. You know, it depends is always the worst one, worst response. But, you know, because it's component defined, and we know that the Workforce Innovation Directorate is still, you know, working on defining those DoD-wide requirements, there's going to be a lot of variability in what that looks like.
Laura, how does one go about like seeding the system with the users? Yeah, talk about
So there's,
little bit.
great question. So there's a couple of data sets within the application that come sort of baked in. As I've already mentioned, there's the work roles, and your organization's groups, for instance, may come during like an onboarding process, but the personnel itself, now I can show you here. There is you have the ability to import users in the application. So if you're connected to your DCPDS system or some other system of record, you can pull in personnel data, and that is part of you know, part of an onboarding process. So there has to be a little bit of data mapping unless it's a standard system like DCPDS. But then, you know, that'll just pull in the personnel record data here. You can also add a user individually. So let's say you're running a reconciliation between the two systems on a weekly basis, and you've got someone who starts on a, you know, an off day, or is really you know, really wants to get into the system and start working on these things, you can just add a user individually. And this, you know, will just request all the same fields that you can also import. So both of those ways for personnel data specifically. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, I think you could show them the import screen too, just to kind
Oh, yeah, thanks.
of.
I know I clicked on that one. It moves around a little bit. So yeah, so here you can import user profiles, and this is just a, you know, drag and drop interface, you know, or click to browse your files. Once you import here, and I apologize, I don't have a spreadsheet handy that would show you, but it's, you know, just an Excel document for those file imports. But you'll get a, you know, a processing log here of the date and time that it was updated, and who imported it, as well as how many records were processed correctly and incorrectly. So if you know you've got 300 rows in that spreadsheet, and you may get, you know, 250 have imported out of 300, you know, you've got some issue with your data, which is completely completely common, I think, particularly at this stage, where we see a lot of organizations are still kind of in the process of reconciling their systems. And then, you know, these files are available for download too. So just kind of tracking. And I will mention also, when a user is created in the system, they've also got this kind of creation information here as well. So, you know, they can be created by an import or by an individual. So here, Rich created this user as sort of a one-off. So that's just, you know, nice data tracking there.
Hey, Laura, we've got a little time. Do you think you could at least demonstrate the complexity of, you know, listing each qualification and what a qualification collection is? Just to give everybody an example of, you know.
Yeah, sure. I'm sorry, can you clarify listing a qualification?
No, so just show the number of qualifications that are individually defined for those thinking of the build versus buy, right? Like you would have to.
Yeah, good question. So let's just look at a larger view here. So qualifications, there are, primarily speaking, there are a couple of types of qualifications. So you can have a certification, some, you know, training, some program that you've completed where you have a certificate at the end of it. There's a document, which may be an acknowledgement, for instance, a user agreement, something that you have to sign. An NDA is a good example of that. And education is a degree, whether that's bachelor, master, etc. I mentioned very briefly this experience certification. This is a qualification alternative for users who may not have other qualifications to meet their work role requirements. They can do an assessment on the KSATs for their work role, and that is a process that they will complete with their supervisor and with a review board. And once that's approved, they are qualified for that work role indefinitely until they change, roles or positions. And then training, just like similar to a certification, that's a program that you take, as well as waivers. So DoD issued, we're going to give you 6 months to complete this. That's something that, needs to be signed generally by a supervisor and by a core. So these are kind of the different types of qualifications. And, we're seeing there's certainly a reuse of the existing certifications and training that a user might have taken to complete their qualification requirements for an 8570 work role. We are seeing, none of those that were accepted for 8570 work roles are going away completely. But there's not a one-to-one association between 8570 and an 8140 work role. So you may find, hey, I took this certification for this work role, I'm now in a new work role, and that doesn't qualify me anymore. So we see a lot of different qualifications in the system. And again, this is a database, so you're not having to kind of look it up in a spreadsheet, maintain a list somewhere, try and figure out who has what. Again, this is a demonstration system, so this does not have kind of the whole ecosystem of what's available. But just scrolling through here, as an example, you've got, I'm just going to click on this first one here, an Air Force training, excuse me. And the way that the qualifications can attach to a user's record can be permanent, or it can be, for a period of time. So as an example, this training here with the Air Force does expire, and it expires every 5 years. And then when the user completes it, they're going to have to we're going to require that they upload their training completion certificate that was issued by the vendor. That's for validation purposes. You can provide instructions to the user. This is blank here, but you may say, go to this website, complete your training, et cetera, et cetera. And the user on the other end of things will see, and if I jump back, let's use one of my own here for an 8570. If I complete a Cloud Plus certificate, this is one again that will expire. And I can say, hey, I completed this on, April 1st of 2024. And I know that this is this expires every 3 years. Some of these are calculated on the user's behalf, like it's a 3-year period. It depends on the vendor. Some of these may be, I think this, yes, Cloud Plus is one of those that's a little bit wonky. So if I actually completed it on the 19th, my expiration date might actually be the end of the month, 3 years down the road. So let's say April 30th, 2027. And then I can put my ID in here, attach the completion file, and save that. Now, those qualifications, this is an individual listing here of all the qualifications in the system. But as I showed you with the work role matrices, users must complete one of these 4. We call that a qualification collection. So if I take a foundational, let's do that one that we, that work role that we showed. So the foundational qualifications for an intermediate security architect, that qualification collection will show all of the various ways that a user can become qualified for their work role. So if they have a CAS Plus, they don't also need a GSEC. So it's like one of this list. And again, for any of the DoD defined work roles, this is pre-configured in the application, but you could make a change yourself. and we are currently working on a feature that allows organizations to say, I don't want this to be an available option to someone who does not already have it. So someone who's in my organization, who's requesting training or certification, actually, I don't want them to use the Defense Acquisition University. A better example of this is some of the training that might qualify a user is Marine training, right? We're not a Marine organization, so I'm not going to allow someone who doesn't already have that training to go and get it. So these are configurable, but again, right out of the box, they match the policy. Does that answer that question, Scott?
Yeah, I thought that was a good overview.
Great. Anything else? And I do see that there's a hand raised in the attendees. I'm not sure if that's intentional or there's the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. So if you've got questions, you can type those in there.
You see a hand raised by Robin Spencer. I don't know how to get...
Those buttons are easy to accidentally smash too. So
yeah, Robin, if you got a question, just drop it in the chat.
and I will meanwhile put this on. Got a few links here for resources.
Laura, did we mention anything about email notifications yet?
We did not. Thank you very much, Arthi.
Yes.
So that is an important thing to notice and to note. And of course, in the scope of a webinar, there's always things you can't cover, but this is it's a good one to talk about. So if I'm looking at the overview page as a user here who's assigned to a work role, and obviously this is our demonstration environment, so you can see a bunch of stuff that's kind of a silly combination here. But my due by date here on my to-do list, this one is a new requirement. Looks like this was assigned a while ago. But let's say that this due date was actually, next week, and I have something that's expiring. What will happen is the user will get a series of email reminders to say, hey, your certification is 60 days out from expiration. You're going to want to get on the renewal for that. And so there's a little cadence that continues to remind them until that qualification is updated. Once they get down to the wire, then their supervisors can be, are copied on that. So this is right now it's kind of baked into the system, but we are working on additional configuration settings for that as well. But that users may get notification reminders for expiring certifications. They would get notifications, for example, I just completely ignored my qualification reminders and requirements and have fallen completely out of compliance. I would get an access cutoff email once that 60-day period rolls around to say, hey, you're going to lose access if you don't fix your compliance posture. And that's when you really start seeing that elevated, their supervisor is copied. You can copy the leader of the organization on that, or the group manager. So lots of email reminders so that it's not, it's not necessary for the user to log into the application, double check, hey, do I have anything? It's going to come straight through their email. And Arthi, I know I mentioned the expiring notifications, the access removal. What are the other?
There's access revoked. There is we also get notified when the supervisor or the compliance reviewer rejects, so that they can do something about it. So we have the rejection, the overdue, the expiring, and then the access revoked. Those are the 4 that we're currently supporting.
Yeah, thanks for that. And actually, since you mentioned it, let me go ahead and show you a rejection. So I'm just going to complete this here. Let's say I fill in this certification and I put in my completion date, and I put my expiration date is the end of this month, right? So there's something wrong here with my qualification entry, and I submit it You know, what we are seeing now is that these compliance management teams are fielding these qualifications in their own inbox. They are communicating with the user through emails or through Teams chat, or, you know, by stopping by somebody's desk. In this, with this tool, when you go to compliance review here, this one that I've just submitted here, I'm going to look down at the, oh, that was the other one. Look at the completion date and the expiration date and say, check your dates here. Expiration doesn't match completion. And I can just go ahead and reject that. And then what that means for the user, I don't have to impersonate, because it's on my own account, which is something you can either allow or prevent your compliance review team from reviewing their own qualifications. But I go to my overview page and you can see that actually just pops right back on my to-do list. So, you know, it's not buried under something. I get an email notification that it's been rejected along with the reason. I can log right in, make the update and say, you know, sorry, my whoops, sorry about that. Reattach and submit it. And then that goes right back into the pending verification, and again, back to the compliance review for that review team to look at. So, and I can see here that they've left a comment. I say thanks, and then I verify it. So now that's gone from my to-do list and I am compliant. So hooray. All right, and I do see a couple of questions in the chat.
You want me to read them to you real quick so you don't have to read them?
Yeah, sure.
So there's one about, hey, are we familiar with the interface to JKO?
I might let Arthi take this one,
Yeah,
if that's.
I started typing out the answer. So Robin, thank you for that question. The tool is definitely capable of interfacing with the JKO system. We have the Army tool that is already integrated with JKO. It's capable of it. We do not support it currently, but it's definitely in our future roadmap. Does that help? Okay, so we have more questions coming in. When you say they will lose access, are you speaking about to the management system or network or privileged access?
Yeah, great question. For the purposes of that email notification, that is a network or privileged access notification. So, hey, you're out of compliance, you're going to be cut off. Once that is performed in the user management system, so Active Directory as an example, we've removed this person's access, they will no longer be able to log in.
Okay. The next question is a great one, Laura. It says, does the email notification come from a .com?
Oh, great question. No, it can come directly from your agency. So we can set up, you know, a separate inbox for that, you know, to say like compliance management team, you know, at youragency.mil or whatever the case may be. It just requires a simple change, you know, in coordination with your IT team.
Okay.
But yeah, we had that, you know, early questions as well. Like, well, what is Cyberstar? Why would I want to see a notification from Cyberstar? Let's just ignore this. So it does come from your own organization.
Okay. Another great question is, can the reports be emailed to groups?
Yes, they absolutely can. Simple question, simple answer.
When you say, okay, sorry, I'm looking at, when you speak of the compliance team, are you referring to the folks that will work under the CSWF PM? we'll be honest, we're not, at least I'm not sure what that acronym stands for, so.
Yeah, I'm less familiar with the acronym, but I think just kind of like the general gist of that question is I'm using compliance team to define a set of individuals who are responsible for tracking and maintaining qualifications and users' position assignment and that position roster. That can be defined however you want. We have several types of users in the system. So you've got general users, and that's like everyone who has you know, a work role assigned to them. In fact, you can even kind of jump outside of that group to say anyone who has a cyber awareness requirement. That's where they log in and see that overview with the to-do list. We've also got group managers, action officers, administrators. We have our own types of administrators. And coming soon, sort of configurable roles and permissions where you can create and name your own, but that's not here right now, but it's something that we've identified will be valuable going forward. So if your compliance team is a small set of leaders from several groups, that's fine. It's just whoever you want to have access to this compliance review tool, as well as to reporting. And I can see a couple of these other questions here. So do they have to tie this into their Active Directory? No, you don't have to. We find that is definitely a best practice. It keeps the information up to date. It also allows the authentication. You know, but if you had a really small group of users and you wanted to use a username and password, you know, within the Department of Defense, that is not likely to fly. But for a private enterprise, that's something that can happen. So yeah, it's not required, but I think for anyone who has an Active Directory system, you know, we find that that's the first integration that.
I think we encourage it mostly for the authentication so that you can authenticate into the tool for login access.
Yep. Yeah, there was another question about, you know, does this system have an authority to operate? So if you could touch on that just briefly. I know we got, but
yes. Yeah, so we have an authority to operate with DCSA. As I mentioned in the presentation, we are also FedRAMP in process. So our DCSA authority to operate is IL2, but assessed for IL5. Our FedRAMP authorization is in process, but towards the later stages. That is the agency route, not the JAB. And we are expecting that ATO to be issued pretty much any day now. We are also you know, pursuing you know, IL4 provisional authorization. So, you know, looking forward to having that as a, you know, additional easing of the procurement process. But, you know, all those security assessments are all kind of underway, but nothing beyond that, the DCSA IL4 ATO at the moment to announce. Scott, I don't know if you have anything else you wanted to add on that.
Laura, we're listed in the FedRAMP marketplace, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so if you have, and I think you can access like you can request a EMS package and stuff in there. But yeah, if you search CyberStar or Wilco Tech, we'll show up in that marketplace. So unless we have any other questions, we're just a couple minutes out here. Morgan, I see your video back on, so I'll let you take the floor back.
Yeah, thank you so much, Laura. That was a great presentation. I want to thank all of our participants who joined us today. We hope you found this webinar informative and helpful to you and your organization. Please take a moment to answer the questions on your screen. We do appreciate your feedback. For those of you who met the CPE requirements today, you will receive your certificate in about 2 weeks. If you have any further questions or would like to request more information, please feel free to contact us. Our information is currently being displayed, so please don't hesitate to call or email. And finally, in the next day or two, we will be emailing you all a link to an archived version of this webinar, along with a few additional resources, so you can review it or pass it along to a colleague. So thank you again for attending, and I hope that everyone has a great day.
Thanks very much, Morgan.